What's a secret you will take to the grave, but don't mind telling on the internet? I had a sweet, wonderful student who had been in foster care, but his mom worked her butt off to get him back and she did. He had to take a very important city exam, and she called me and asked if he passed it. I looked at the grades and saw he did and said so. She burst into tears of joy, and that is when I saw I had read the wrong score. He had failed. So I changed his grade to passing. No one knew. That was the only time I ever did that. That could have cost me my license. The weird thing is, when my awful corrupt principal pressured me to change other students' scores so we could raise our pass rate, I refused. I never told anyone what I did for my student. He went into the military, was extremely successful there, has a great wife and kids, so I think I did the right thing. Screw those tests. They aren't human. Speaking of grave, when I was a teenager, some friends and I got really stoned and walked around the town graveyard. There was a whole section of generic flat grave markers from the 1800s. I found myself trying to imagine their lives in the same town that I lived in so long ago. Then I saw one plate kind of sticking up and crooked, and I bent down to touch it. It wasn't attached at all, and I lifted it up in my hand. Right then, my asinine stone teenage brain decided to put it in my backpack. I thought I'd somehow honor this stranger more than the shitty groundskeeper leaving it all willy-nilly in the middle of the aisle. None of my friends saw what I did. Few hours later, sober, and the guilt and panic are setting in. I hid the plate in my closet for about a year before I chucked it back over the fence one day late at night. I hope Bessie Jane Holmes doesn't mind that I kept her for a while. I still think back and shudder at the guilt of such immoral shenanigans. I used to work for the airport and so got very discounted fares for friends and family. My mom was going on a trip with her friend to Key West and they were gonna drive since flying was too expensive. I talked her into letting me handle the flying arrangements and they'd save a ton. A typical $500+ flight turned into like $250 for both of them combined. Well, I was still kinda new at booking reservations and whatnot, and I ended up screwing up the reservation. I think I only booked it for one way or something. So the night before their flight, I rebooked it and paid the $450 for the both of them. Money I really didn't have and have since never told my mom. It was for Mother's Day, so I figured that was my gift to her. It's been nearly 10 years since. My father burned down my childhood home for the insurance money. He took me along as his alibi, so I could verify he wasn't anywhere near it when it happened. I was 13 years old. I remember crying so hard knowing my clothes, books, photos, all of it would be destroyed. I wasn't allowed to save anything because he told me it would have been too suspicious. I found out years later he blamed it on me, telling the fire chief, plus friends and family, the fire had started because I must have been secretly smoking in my bedroom. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. That my dad paid my mom $1,500 for full custody of my youngest sibling. Not only would this be a massive blow to my sibling, but my dad remarried quite quickly, and the new wife is a very definition of an evil stepmom. If my sibling knew that our mom gave her up for such a small sum of money and the trade-off was 5+ years of abuse, she would be destroyed. Seems like a good time as any to tell this story. When I was a teenager, my parents were divorced yet lived within walking distance of each other. I would oftentimes walk back and forth between their homes for whatever reason. I got to know a family that lived in the house on the corner of the block my mother lived on. One day as I was passing this house, I noticed a wallet on the ground. I picked up and opened the wallet. I noticed the address on the ID was the house on the corner, and it was the mom of the family, a very nice lady. Me being a teenager, took all of the money out of the wallet, about $50. I then went back to the home and returned the wallet, explaining I found it down the street. The mother was very relieved and grateful. What always weighed on me is a few weeks later I passed the corner house as I often did, and the lady stopped me. She wanted to thank me for returning the wallet and handed me a $50 bill. I tried to refuse it, but she insisted. I was rewarded for stealing. While it's not a big secret, it is something I always think about for some reason. I've never really had the heart to tell anyone this story. As a teenager, I had cancer multiple times and nearly died a lot. At one point, I spent several weeks in intensive care and survived despite no doctor thinking that I possibly could live. More than 20 years later, everyone I know still comments on how I survived purely on will to live. I actually spent every moment in that hospital bed in absolute agony, desperately wanting to die. Every year I write my parents a Christmas card signed by Sarah and Michael. They still have no idea who they are and spend a lot of Christmas Day trying to figure it out. So my grandfather had a hand in making one of the World Series trophies back in the day. He never got any credit, but we have photos and parts from his prototype. When I was a teen I added what I knew to Wikipedia, since why not, although I believe it's gone now, but funny story, I ended up being quoted in newspapers all over the country. Proceed to a few years later I get a call from my mom, who's almost in tears of joy. She found that wiki page and was freaking out. She was so happy he finally got credit. She ended up making really fancy shadow boxes of the wiki page printed out, copies of the photos and other baseball stuff. She made one for each of her siblings. I've had to just bite my tongue every time I go over there and see this thing hanging prominently in the living room. My dad cheated on my mom and invited the person over when I was 9. She was a severely overweight woman and my dad is also quite overweight. My parents were fighting, but trying to work things out. They slept in separate rooms at this point. Earlier that day I had jumped on his bed and broke the board supporting it on the bed frame. I wasn't allowed to do this and always got in trouble for this reason. My mom smelled the fact that my dad had company because she smoked in my house. She asked if I jumped on the bed. I said no. I feared I'd get in trouble. I was surprised there was no follow-up trying to prove my guilt. Years later I remember why she asked and realized my lie basically incriminated him to banging her. I'm sure he did, but that got him kicked out of my house. My first car accident back in high school was not because I swerved to miss a deer, like I told my dad and the police. I actually tried to pull the emergency brake and do a 180 while going 50 miles per hour downhill. Had I gone off the other side of the road I would have gone down a 50-foot hill and into the river. That was the last time I ever tried anything like that. There just so happened to be deer tracks in the mud near the ditch where I ended up. I avoided a ticket and my dad paid to fix my car. I have never told him the truth in the 15+ years since. My father-in-law died of a heart attack at a strip club. The cop told my wife and mother-in-law that it was a bar. They assumed it was a sports bar. My brother-in-law and I had to pick up the car from said strip club. We both pledged to never tell the rest of the family. Once when I was 13 I went a week and a half without pooping. I was on a camping trip and something must have happened with the drinking water / my digestion. Took laxatives. Nothing worked. My stomach was killing me but nothing would come out. Then one evening after dinner, I felt it coming. I knew this was it. I bolted for the bathhouse, mentally preparing for the epic event. When I finally waddled in, the stalls were all occupied. At this point I'm freaking out. I'm literally going to shit my pants and in the woods with no means of cleaning. I waddle to the private shower attached to the bathrooms and my desperate mind starts solving problems like I'm Bradley Cooper in Limitless. Initially I think to just shit on the shower drain and waffle stomp it through, but I was not going to be that guy who ruined the nicest shower in the woods for everyone. Like a bolt of lightning I knew what I had to do. So I pooped in the only piece of clothing I could spare, my sock. Obviously my stomach was doing better now and I was hugely relieved. I brought the poop sock to the dumpster nearby and one of my friends saw me on the way. Before I could dispose of the poop sock he strikes up a conversation and starts asking questions about what I'm doing. Internally I'm panicking. The best excuse I could come up with was that I found a sock in the shower, stuffed with mud, so I thought it best to throw it away. My friend affirms how good of a guy I'm for doing that. I throw the poop sock into the dumpster and my problems are finally over. Mud in a sock is a ridiculous story, but there's absolutely no way he could have guessed that the real situation was much more bizarre. I've never told a soul about this until now. Never will again. When I was little, my parents would take my brother and me Christmas shopping for an angel every year. I'm sure that the year I was in first grade, the angel we bought for was one of my classmates. After Christmas break, When everyone was sharing stories about presents, she described literally everything we had bought. I kept my mouth shut, but I knew. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Do all the YouTube stuff and I'll see you tomorrow.